everybody, and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, which saw Shazam 2, Fury of the Gods, completely fall apart, only making an abysmal $30.5 million, and when you expand that out globally, fell about $20 million short of where the projections had it. So the film was already projected to make a very small amount of money in comparison to many others, but it fell even shorter of that. Right now, we can say with a pretty strong amount of confidence that the movie, especially seeing that the film is not all that great and probably won't get a whole lot of fan fervor behind it, as it currently is not at this point, probably will end up being a pretty massive loss. This is really not a surprise for Warner Brothers, which has been a big box office loser for the past few years. It seems that that trend is going to continue, and it does raise some questions as far as the future DCEU projects that are coming out. We have films like the Flash movie set to come out, right, which probably costs a crap ton of money, needs to make a lot of money to break even. Some have said that it needs to make $1 billion. I would like to wait for the actual budgets themselves and for them to get updated to be able to actually make that assessment. Regardless, it's going to have to make a lot of money worldwide to break even, and so if this is going to be kind of the start of the DCEU's box office for 2023, yeah, not a very good start whatsoever. We also have some second weekend numbers for films like Scream 6, for the film 65, Champions as well, and also some updates for some other films. Before we any further though, please make sure you smash that like button, live that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. Also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with the bell notification on, that way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So first off, a blessed Latari Sunday to everyone out there. We are in the halfway point of Lent. Technically Thursday was the halfway point, but during the Sundays of Lent, this is the Sunday that we commemorate being, hey, we're getting close. We're more than halfway there at this point in time. And so if you are fasting or abstaining from things because of the Lenten season or in union with the Lenten season, thank you very much. And also, I pray for you, and please pray for me as well. Pray also for the studio heads currently running Warner Brothers, because it's just not looking good for them whatsoever. Shazam, as it says here from Deadline, Fury of the Gods strikes out with $66 million. So remember how before the weekend, when we did the box office preview, I pointed out that, Nancy and, the crew over at Deadline, they like to create these headlines, of course, that, try and get clicks, kind of the point of news sites. But then they also leave out some key pieces of information, right? If they were going to have headlines like this, but then they were going to actually give, projected ticket sale amounts, or, show you the mathematics behind ticket sales, or try to show you also the adjustment numbers for inflation. Those, again, would be things that I would say, at least they're doing their due diligence in the actual crux of the article, but they don't do that. So they do these types of headlines and then also don't give you the full story. So this is not only bad based off of what the projections were, but when you keep in mind that the first Shazam film opened to $50 million plus just in the domestic marketplace before adjusting for inflation, you actually recognize that the domestic opening for the first Shazam film, when you make that adjustment, is actually just about where the worldwide total for this new film currently is. So that should give you a huge much better understanding of exactly why and how bad Shazam 2's opening actually has been. As they talk about here, less than heroic launch with 65.5 global, including 35 million internationally and only $30 million domestic. This is, as I said, just a terrible number here. It says, despite getting a day-and-date release there, talking here about, I believe it says, overall, the main issue with Shazam 2 appears to be disconnect with hardcore DC fans, and when it comes to China, an increasingly cold shoulder approach of audiences to Hollywood fare. So they're, again, making excuses, saying, the people of China aren't going to see Shazam 2 because of a cold shoulder to Hollywood releases. And it's like, but wait a minute, we know as a fact that there are films that they will go out to go and see and will actually give hundreds of millions of dollars to. It's just that those films tend to be a little bit bigger. I mean, go ahead and look to films like Avatar, The Way of Water, for instance. I mean, that is as American Hollywood as you can possibly get, and yet that film made a lot of money. So they're continuing to try to make excuses for these movies. It could also just be, hey, this film isn't very good. And so it's not just that it disconnects with DC audiences. It's not just because of anything of that nature. It could also be, hey, why would anyone who is a DC fan want to see this movie when the new head of the DC universe, basically the new person running the show, when James Gunn has already been making the announcements of, oh, well, this doesn't matter anymore, this doesn't matter anymore, we're just going to reboot everything. So then also that kind of raises the question of, what are the stakes then? Why would you want to invest your time and money into a film that, one, doesn't seem to matter for one, and then two, doesn't look all that good, and I can confirm it really isn't all that great. It's a fine movie. Again, it's okay. It is passable. There are moments where it is actually entertaining. There's moments where the magic of the first film shines through. That first film was a B-level movie. This film falls more into being a C-level movie because it just falls apart in many other areas, especially when it comes to the CGI and the story being just overly long and not all that interesting to boot. And so it says, despite getting day-and-date release there in China, moviegoers did not turn up for Shazam 2. Oh, but I thought it was just China showing a cold shoulder. Oh, you're saying everyone is. Oh, and it's because of the hardcore DC fans not showing up. Yeah, okay, sure, bud, whatever it is that you want to say. And this is the reason why I like to use Deadline as a frame of reference, because you get your understanding as to why I just do not trust them whatsoever. Let's go ahead and actually look at some numbers, because numbers themselves are usually a lot more clear than anything else. So Shazam, as you see, $30.5 million in its opening weekend here domestically, and this is just abysmal. $7,400 per screen, coming out over 4,000 screens. This is a terrible per theater ratio. Remember, we were talking about films not too long ago that were having $14,000 per screen in their openings. So this is just, again, showing you that this movie is not really, doing all that well when all is said and done. Let me go ahead and see if I can actually compare this. So when you look at the first, weekend for Scream 6, for instance, Scream 6, that's right, Scream 6 made $44.4 million. This film made 30.5. Heck, even look at Creed 3's second weekend numbers of 27.2, and you're looking at this film getting barely over that in its opening weekend. This is Warner Brothers continuing to fail, continuing to show itself as being mostly irrelevant because they just do not know how to make movies, how to promote movies, let alone how to spend their money wisely on movies. And so their continued box office loss, and working box office loss at that, continues going forward, as this film likely will end up losing probably close to $100 million for them when all is said and done. I would just not be surprised if that ended up being the final number. We'll have an official breakdown of that by the end of next weekend, though, when we get this week 2 numbers in. But with John Wick 4 coming out, this film is probably going to have a massive steep drop-off, especially with bad word of mouth, with the film not being all that great. Scream 2, on the other hand, even though it did have a 61% drop, again, the hardcore fans showed up that opening weekend, still is the 61% drop, it was able to do well enough with those hardcore fans, where the film is, again, making profits now at this point in time, and justifying them to continue this franchise up until they no longer show up. But because these are just the hardcore fans that are left, they've already lost a huge portion of their audience when you compare the numbers to Scream 2, Scream 3, kind of like at the heyday of the Scream franchise. You see a lot of people have fallen away from it, and especially when you look at the new numbers for the adjusted for inflation ticket price, you see that a lot less tickets are being sold for this versus those other films. Regardless, though, it's still making its money back, it's still making profit, and so if you're a fan of the Scream franchise, you should be very happy and know that Scream 7, 8, 9, 10 probably are likely, because the profit margin on this film probably is going to be pretty good. Creed 3 also, some people should be happy with. I know that there are people who are fans of this movie. I am not one of them. I did not think the film was very good at all. I think that Creed 2, Creed 3 have both been bad films. However, with that being said, even in its third week of its release, it is losing over 500 screens. It is also a film, though, that has made its money back and is already starting to become profitable as well. But as I mentioned, and luckily, shout out to the numbers, and I've mentioned this in previous videos, they have actually updated their charting for ticket sales to reflect what the actual average ticket price would be in today's dollars, in today's terms. Basically, what happened was the National Theater Alliance, which, it's called short for the shorthand NATO, but it's the national theater chains. They every year would put out the average ticket price, but they haven't done so the last several years because of COVID. And so therefore, because of that, there really hasn't been a good metric to go off of. And so if you look at any of the ticket sales mentioned by the numbers or other sites, most of them would be using the $9.17 average ticket price, but we know as a fact that that's not true. In fact, more recently, it's gone upwards of $10.45 when you look at the nationwide average of ticket sales. And so when you take that into account, even though financially Creed 3 absolutely is a success, if we compare the overall ticket sales, we will see that there is still a large discrepancy. And that's not just for Creed, that's obviously for Shazam, but also for the Scream films and for any of the films that we talk about, whether I like them or not. The ticket sales for these films are just not good in comparison. I think one of the biggest examples of that is if you compare the ticket sales for the first Avatar domestically alone to that of the second Avatar, you're talking about a difference of around 20 or maybe 40 to 60 million tickets. That's a pretty big difference. And again, the films are still doing really well, But that's the reason why that adjustment for inflation number is so important, because especially when you're doing comparisons of average ticket sales, it gives you a much better metric of how many people have still gone to the movie theaters and how many people are no longer going to the movie theaters either. The film 65 is another one of these examples of films not doing all that well. This film, $45 million budget. I know the numbers is claiming it's $91 million, but they are the only site that is claiming that. I don't know if that's just a mistake on their end or if that is just the number that they're going with, but I'd even double check these numbers, and I'll mention that when I talk about 65 individually. This film, though, even with a $45 million budget, not looking very good, likely will end up losing money by the end of its run. Same thing could be said, of course, about Ant-Man and the Wasp, but this is something that we've known for a while. This film probably won't even get to $500 million, which is what I had set at its break-even point, which is a much more conservative estimate based off of typical standards, not including any massive reshoots or massive extra marketing, which we can not always account for. So the fact is, this film will end up losing somewhere between $20 and $100 million when everything is said and done. Not a very good look for the MCU or Disney going forward. Coming to the number 6 spot is Cocaine Bear, which I finally saw. I don't understand why people are enjoying it. There were a couple of funny moments, a couple of characters. The actors are what really made the film for me, but the CGI bear was just not well done. The story, not well done, and it's really, really sad. That all being said, the film is very close to making its money back. It still has a little ways to go, so even though it is losing a lot of its money at this point, it is still close enough to where it likely will break even within the next couple of weeks. Jesus Revolution, still the number 7 spot, $3.5 million, again, adding to its overall monetary gain. Champions, coming out now in the second week of release, dropping 41%. Don't have a budget for this movie, so I cannot say whether the film is a success or not, but the film did cost somewhere between $20 and $30 million or so, which it seems like it might. Then that would not be a very good sign for that film's financial future. Avatar Way of Water continuing to hang around with $1.9 million, but as you can see, it is slowly starting to lose its theaters. Probably will be out of theaters completely within the next few weeks, if I had to guess. Puss in Boots, same story, right? It is starting to lose its theaters, but notice how, because its drops have actually been much stronger than even that of Avatar Way of Water, there's only about a week difference between the two. This movie is actually the most impressive film that I have seen in my charting since I have been doing the chart percentages. Compared to its first 2 weeks, this film has almost basically tripled its money. Right now, the first 2 weeks only account for 28% of its entire total. Now, again, Avatar, it only accounts for around 30%, so it is also a chart breaker in that way, but Puss in Boots is actually doing much better as far as the actual compared to percentage-wise the first couple weeks of release. Going into the individual releases here, Shazam! Fury of the Gods, $65.5 million. As you can see, the $125 million budget means this film has only made 0.5 times its budget, far below the 2.5 times its budget that it needs to make to break even. And I believe there's actually reports that some of the creators behind the film have already said also this film not likely is making any money and is very much a flop. Scream 6 at $116 million worldwide because of a very low overall budget, definitely adding to its numbers here and continuing to add to its profits. Creed 3 also is at the point of profitability with over $224 million, but as I said, that number, do take it with a grain of salt. Some people are going to start to try to say and argue saying, well, if you compare that to Creed 2's numbers, and if you compare that, etc., then you're seeing that this film is going to be the highest grossing film, right? 224 versus 245. I mean, yes, this is, of course, the adjusted number without the current rate of inflation. Again, they fixed their ticket price metric, but they have not fixed their comparison, their adjusted for inflation number metric here. And so therefore it's important just to keep that into perspective. But then also, even if the film is able somehow to cross the number of Creed 2's actual numbers adjusted for inflation, when you compare the ticket sales, you're going to see that Creed 2 is definitely going to be a lot higher than that of Creed 3. And again, Creed 3 is still doing well. Creed 3 is making its money back. Creed 3 is doing very well. And I'm not going to try to take away from that. But what I am going to point out is that there's less tickets overall being sold. The reason why the numbers are higher is because the average ticket price has gone up by quite a bit over the last few years. The film 65 at $38.8 million, not a very good start to this movie. As I mentioned before, they are saying that the film cost $91 million over at the numbers, but again, going over to Wikipedia, which itself is not reliable, but the sourcing is, as you can see, it says and talks about here, the $45 million number budget for this film being recorded by Variety, and that's the reason why I am going with that number in my charting, because again, the numbers is the only site that I'm aware of mentioning that $91 million. And based off of what I saw, I cannot see how they could possibly have spent more than $45 million because the effects are not all that good. Speaking of not having good effects, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania, only at $462 million, very much well below the historical average for movies, like this and around this time of year. So definitely not a good look for this film going forward, likely $100 million loss or so. Jesus Revolution continuing to add to its profits. Champions at $12 million, hard to say. Again, historically seems to be doing okay, but without a budget, can't say one way or the other. And then a film I really enjoyed, only at 400 screens now because it got a domestic release a little bit later than others, and unfortunately, no one has gone to see it. If this is still playing near you, I highly recommend it. This is, again, another phenomenal film that is being put forward here, and I would say everyone would do very well and would be, I think most people would actually end up being very happy with it. It's a Guy Ritchie film, has a really good cast. It actually shows Aubrey Plaza in a role where you actually don't mind her being on screen, which is something that I've just never really liked her as an actress. This is one of those films, though, where she does a fantastic job, and if you want to find out more thoughts about my thoughts on this film, go check out my review on the channel. Cocaine Bear, $74.8 million. Again, not all that high as far as the historical average, but definitely well enough for it to likely make its money back. Looking at the charting, because we love to do some box office charting here. As you can see, with the start of $65.5 million for Shazam 2, likely going to end up being a massive loser, currently at $148 million in the red. And do not be surprised if next week's numbers, especially with John Wick 4 coming out, to not also be that much higher. And so, yeah, film I can pretty much guarantee at this point will end up being a flop. The question is, how much money will it lose? Somewhere between $50 and $100 million when all is said and done, if I had to take a guess. Scream 6 at $116 million is currently $17 million in the black, so kudos to that franchise for having enough fans to be able to show up for and support its franchise. Right now, I'm projecting it to make somewhere between $46 and $86 million in net gain profits, with the overall end box office being somewhere between $165 and $232 million. For the film 65, based off of a very dismal $38.8 million second week, I'm projecting the film to make somewhere between $55 and $77 million when all is said and done. Based off of that $45 million budget, that means the film will either lose 34 or as good as $20 million in the red when everything is said and done. So again, not good numbers there. Right now it's $44 million in the red. Again, not looking good for that film. Champions without a budget, all I can say is that it will likely make somewhere between 17 and 24 million when all is said and done. We've already done the breakdown for Creed, so just to see where that film currently is in its release, as you can see, Operation Fortune, which is a film I really like, ultimately is still a flop with $58 million in the red there. Creed 3's $224 million means $22 million in net gain profit, and I'm projecting this film to make somewhere between probably $50 and $100 million at this point in time based off of the numbers that we are currently seeing. In fact, let me see. I don't know if we're in the second week of the release or not. No, we're not. So right now it's at 80%. So very likely, since we're only in the third week of its release, probably going to get into the 70s range, probably even into the high 60s range, which means ultimately that the film will be very good in likely getting to that, again, $40+ million net gain profit for the film. Cocaine Bear is currently $3 million in the red. So again, not too far off from that. Probably will be able to get to that point within a week or two, but still probably not nearly as much as some people may have thought the film would have made. It would have been interesting to see. I know someone asked this question actually in the comments section of one of my videos of whether or not I thought that if Elizabeth Banks had not directed it, whether it would have made more money. Well, obviously that would have made a very different movie, and so it's hard to say that for sure. But it would not have surprised me had that actually been the case. Jesus Revolution, $4 million in the black, and not huge profits, but hey, profits nonetheless. And then Ant-Man the Wasp Quantumania, $22 million in the red, and this is using a much more conservative $500 million break-even point. Others have the break-even point closer to $600 million, meaning we're going to see a film lose somewhere between probably $20 and $100 million when all the numbers are finally in. And those are really all of the last updates that I have. If you want to, again, get more updates, you can check out my website, ombreviews.com, and go to the box office numbers, right? Box office tracking. And I have updated all of these numbers to include all of the different categories. You have, of course, the stable box here, so that way you can track these things further. But what are your thoughts about this? Are you surprised to see Shazam, Fury of the Gods, making so little money? Again, The original projections for the movie was around $80 million internationally. It only made $65.5 million. Not a very good look at all. So what are y'all's thoughts about that? Also, what are y'all's thoughts about any of the other films that I mentioned? I am going to try to do a video breaking down the comparisons between all of the franchise players. And so this will go for the Shazam franchise, for Scream's franchise, for Ant-Man, for other MCU films, for the Creed films, and then also for the upcoming John Wick 4, because I think that the same standard that I'm holding to all of these movies will probably also hold to that one also, with a decrease in the number of overall ticket sales. Though I will say, what you see in the John Wick franchise is a very interesting increase in profits over time. So again, I will still treat that one as fairly as any other film on this list. And so let me know your thoughts about that and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, like that fire button, honestly, smash the rumble button as well. Again, I hope you have a blessed Latare Sunday, a blessed, again, midway point of your Lenten season, rocking the rose light today. You guys are all amazing. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge shout out to all of my March Patreon, Subscribe Star, and local members at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above. Starting off with Father Luca Illich, Garrett Searles, Chris from the 80s, who can check out over his YouTube channel by the same name, Jaimir Irie Hymason, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange at Reviews, who can check out over at his YouTube channel, Laura, the Modern Major General Story, Rosetta Allen, who can check out at her YouTube channel, Eagle Writer, Miss Martin Muses, and you can check her out at her YouTube channel by the same name also. To my Subscribe Star members, Matt317, you can check out over at his Twitch channel, Matt317, Fast Reaction, The R, Mr. Roy, J-Rod, The Beer Guru, and ZK-Man, who you can find out over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my locals members, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, Brett D90, and the amazing lawyer, Robert Barnes. Thank you all very much for supporting me at the Patreon level, Subscribe Star level, and locals level of Keeper the Bifrost and above. If you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and every video, make sure to check out the top link in the video description to find out more ways that you can support the channel, including ways to get access to a podcast and also ways to get access to giveaways that I do on the channel, and also, of course, to my coveted Chosen of Valhalla level as well. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and as always, God bless.